While this quorum call is underway, we'll go live now to remarks from Secretary of State John Kerry, who is just beginning remarks on the begun Palestinian-Israeli peace talks.
Both have leaders willing to heed the call of history. Leaders who will stand strong in the face of criticism and are right now for what they know is in their people's best interests. Their commitment to make tough choices, frankly, should give all of us hope that these negotiations actually have a chance to accomplish something. I'm pleased to report that in the conversations we've had last night and again today, we've had constructive and positive meetings, both meetings with the United States President and also meetings with the parties by themselves. The parties have agreed to remain engaged in sustained, continuous, and substantive negotiations on the core issues, and they will meet within the next 2 weeks in either Israel or the Palestinian territories in order to begin the process of formal negotiation. The parties have agreed here today that all of the final status issues, all of the core issues, and all other issues are all on the table for negotiation. And they are on the table with one simple goal, a view to ending the conflict, ending the claims. Our objective will be to achieve a final status agreement over the course of the next 9 months. The parties also agreed that the two sides will keep the content of the negotiations confidential. The only announcement you will hear about meetings is the one that I just made. And I will be the only one, by agreement, authorized to comment publicly on the talks in consultation, obviously, with the parties. That means that no one should consider any reports, articles, or other, or even rumors reliable unless they come directly from me, and I guarantee you they won't. The United States will work continuously with both parties as a facilitator every step of the way. We all understand the goal that we're working towards. Two states living side by side in peace and security, two states because two proud peoples each deserve a country to call their own. Two states because the children of both peoples deserve the opportunity to realize their legitimate aspirations in security and in freedom, and two states because the time has come for a lasting peace. We all appreciate, believe me, we appreciate the challenges ahead. But even as we look down the difficult road that is before us and consider the complicated choices that we face, we cannot lose sight of something that is often forgotten in the Middle East, and that is what awaits everybody with success. We need to actually change the way we think about compromise in order to get to success. Compromise doesn't only mean giving up something or giving something away. Reasonable, principled compromise in the name of peace means that everybody stands to gain. Each side has a stake in the other's success, and everyone can benefit from the dividends of peace. We simply wouldn't be standing here if the leaders, President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and their designated negotiators, and all of us together didn't believe that we could get there. We can envision a day when Palestinians can finally realize their aspirations for a flourishing state of their own. And the groundbreaking economic initiative that we've been working on with the Quartet and with Tony Blair and others, with the help of the private sector, can help transform the Palestinian economy and build up unprecedented markets and unblock waves of foreign investment. And we shouldn't forget that the new jobs, the new homes, the new industries that can grow in a new Palestinian state will also benefit Israelis next door, where a vibrant economy will find new partners. We can also envision a day when Israelis actually can truly live in peace, not just the absence of conflict, but a full and a lasting peace with Arab and Muslim nations, and end once and for all to the pernicious attacks on Israel's legitimacy. Israel and Israelis and Palestinians both have legitimate security concerns. Our commitment to Israel's security is why President Obama's administration has done more than any before it to strengthen our unshakable bond, and why General John Allen is on the ground working to ensure Israel's security needs will be met. And I emphasize, we have worked very closely with our Palestinian friends to help develop Palestinian security capacity. And we cannot forget that the security of Israel will also benefit Palestinians next door. The Israeli government has recognized this, which is why it will be taking in the next days and weeks a number of steps in order to improve conditions in the West Bank and in Gaza. And the Palestinian security forces have recognized this, which is why we have seen such a dramatic improvement in law and order and such a dramatic decrease in terror attacks originating from the West Bank. The Israeli and Palestinian people understand their common interests, and that's why they continue to take positive steps on the ground to improve relations between themselves. I also want to point out that the Arab League understands this too, which is why it has reaffirmed the Arab Peace Initiative and provided vital statements of support for this process. Finally, I just say everywhere I go, leaders from around the world understand that they share a stake in this endeavor's success. They all have a role to play, which is why they have continued to contribute to this effort, to advise, to make commitments of support, and to push and advocate and encourage the parties every step of the way. And President Obama and I join in thanking all of them for their concern and initiative. So many things are already happening. When somebody tells you that Israelis and Palestinians cannot find common ground or address the issues that divide them, don't believe them. Just look at the things they are doing together and trying to do together. There are many reasons why we need to solve this conflict, but none more important than the security and the dignity of the next generations of Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and the generations who will follow them and benefit from these negotiations, hopefully. I think everyone involved here believes that we cannot pass along to another generation the responsibility of ending a conflict that is in our power to resolve in our time. They should not be expected to bear that burden, and we should not leave it to them. They should not be expected to bear the pain of continued conflict or perpetual war. So while I understand the skepticism, I don't share it, and I don't think we have time for it. I firmly believe the leaders, the negotiators, and citizens invested in this effort can make peace for one simple reason: because they must. A viable two-state solution is the only way this conflict can end, and there is not much time to achieve it, and there is no other alternative. We all need to be strong in our belief in the possibility of peace, courageous enough to follow through on our faith in it, and audacious enough to achieve what these two peoples have so long aspired to and deserve. Dr. Erica.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Livni. On behalf of President Mahmoud Abbas, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation to President Barack Obama and to you, Secretary Kerry, for your relentless efforts and unwavering commitment to achieve a just, a comprehensive, lasting peace between Palestinians and Israelis. Palestinians have suffered enough, and no one benefits more from the success of this endeavor more than Palestinians. I'm delighted that all final status issues are on the table and will be resolved without any exceptions. And it's time for the Palestinian people to have an independent, sovereign state of their own. It's time for the Palestinians to live in peace, freedom, and dignity within their own independent sovereign state. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Livni.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Secretary Kerry. On behalf of Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli government and the State of Israel, for your determination, for not giving up, because you need to know that I think it was our first meeting during this process that you said to me that failure is not an option. And you proved today that failure is not an option. And this is the man, Secretary Kerry, who showed everyone that nothing can stop true believers. And thank you for that. I also want to thank President Obama for his personal commitment to peace and to Israel's security. The powerful impression left by the President's last visit to Israel still remains in the hearts of the Israeli people. We came here today, Mr. Molcho, the Special Envoy of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and myself, after years of settlement. We came here today from a troubled and changing region. We are hopeful, but we cannot be naive. We cannot afford it in our region. We owe it to our people to do everything, but everything we can for their security and for the hope of peace for future generations. But you know, it took more than just a plane ticket to be here today. A courageous act of leadership by Prime Minister Netanyahu that was approved by the Israeli government made this visit here and the beginning of the negotiation possible. We all know that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard with ups and downs. But I can assure you that in these negotiations, it's not our intention to argue about the past, but to create solutions and make decisions for the future. You know, Saib, we all spent some time in the negotiations room. We didn't reach that end in the past, but we didn't complete our mission. And this is something that we need to do now in these negotiations that we relaunch today. A new opportunity has been created for us, for all of us, and we cannot afford to waste it. Now, I hope that our meeting today and the negotiations that we have relaunched today will cause, I hope, a spark of hope, even if small, to emerge out of cynicism and pessimism that is so often heard. It is our task to work together so that we can transform that spark of hope into something real and lasting. And finally, I believe that history is not made by cynics, it is made by realists who are not afraid to dream. And let us be these people. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Can you please?
A beginning. Let's go. Take it.
State Department spokesman John Kerry and Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat and Israeli Representative Tzipi Livni on the start of a new round of Mideast peace talks. Those talks started with a dinner last night here in Washington on a time frame of about 9 months. We did join this event in progress, by the way, so if you want to go back and see the entire thing, it is available in the C-SPAN video library at cspan.org. Well, the Senate remarks today have been mostly on nominees to the National Labor Relations Board. Earlier, senators moved a step closer to approving Democratic nominees to the board when they voted 64 to 34 to cut off debate and move to a final confirmation vote for Kent Hirozawa to become a National Labor Relations Board member. Associated Press reporting that in addition to Mr. Hirozawa, the two other Democrats President Obama has nominated for the post and heading in for votes today are Mark Gaston Pierce, the board's current chair, and attorney Nancy Schiffer. Votes on those nominations coming up as Congress prepares to start a 5-week summer recess this weekend. Now, also today, we are expecting Senate debate on their version of federal funding for transportation and housing department programs and policies for the next year. It's about $54 billion. It's about $10 billion more than the House bill. The Senate expected to recess at about 12:30 Eastern. They'll be back at 2:15 Eastern for debate on those nominations and for transportation and housing department programs and policies.
Further proceedings on the quorum call be suspended, and I be recognized to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Over the last few years, I've spoken on the floor about how the Department of Defense procures major weapons systems, a system that, to a large degree, is broken, unfortunately. But it is now even more important, with defense funding likely to be constrained to reduced levels in the coming years. Our role as legislators overseeing major defense acquisition programs to make sure they are efficient and effective is as important today as it's ever been, indeed even more so. A recently released Government Accountability Office, GAO, report that is highly critical of the Navy's littoral combat ship program brings me to the floor today. On that program, the Navy plans to spend over $40 billion to buy a total of 52 C-frames and 64 so-called plug-and-play mission modules. These are modules that would be moved on and off depending on the mission that the littoral combat ship is engaged in. The combined capability of those modules with the C-frames is supposed to give these ships their intended lethality. Until recently, my main concern with this program has been the unbridled growth to the cost to build the C-frames of the lead ship. The lead ship called the Freedom, the steel-hulled version, and the Independence, which is an aluminum trimaran version. The Navy appears to have addressed that problem. While the cost to build the C-frames for the follow-up ships is still about double the program's originally over-optimistic cost estimate, which is not unusual, the cost to complete their construction appears to have stabilized at about $450 million each. Today I'm concerned about another very serious problem, that the Navy will buy too many of these ships before the combination of their C-frames with their interchangeable mission modules has been proven capable of performing the missions these ships are supposed to perform. In other words, the Navy won't know whether this littoral combat ship meets the combatant commander's operational requirements until after it has procured more than half of the 52 planned ships. This is particularly troubling inasmuch as the littoral combat ship fleet will comprise more than 1/3 of the Navy's surface combatant ships. The littoral combat ship's stated primary mission are anti-submarine warfare, mine countermeasures, and surface warfare against small boats, especially in the littorals. These three primary missions appear oriented towards countering, among other things, some of the littoral or coastal anti-access area denial capabilities that have been fielded in recent years by potential adversaries. The Navy took delivery of the first of these two ships, the Freedom and Independence, more than 3 years ago. The ship called Freedom actually deployed, albeit with limited capability, to Singapore in March and has experienced many of the technical challenges normally associated with a prototype ship. The decision to deploy the ship Freedom prior to the completion of critical development and operational testing may be good salesmanship on the part of the Navy, but the current plan to buy more than half of the total littoral combat ship fleet prior to the completion of operational testing plainly contradicts defense acquisition guidelines and best procurement practices and amounts to a case of buy before you fly, to borrow a phrase from aircraft acquisitions. It also increases the risk that the program will incur additional costs to backfit already built littoral combat ships with expensive design changes identified through late testing and evaluation, or worse, operational use. As is the case in several other major defense acquisition programs, the problem here is excessive concurrency. That is, an overlap between development and production that exposes the program to a high risk of costly retrofits to earlier units in the production run. It sounds simple, but this is the problem that for years rendered the Joint Strike Fighter program effectively unexecutable, and that led to the terminations of the Army's multi-billion-dollar Future Combat Systems program and the Air Force's Expeditionary Combat Support System program. As to littoral combat ship, the General Accountability Office spelled out this problem in the report it released just a few days ago. According to the GAO, quote, there are significant unknowns related to key LCS operations and support concepts and the relative advantages and disadvantages of the two variants. The potential effect of these unknowns on the program is compounded by the Navy's aggressive acquisition strategy. By the time key tests of integrated LCS capability are completed in several years, the Navy will have procured or have under contract more than half of the planned number of ships. Almost half of the planned ships are already under contract, and the Navy plans to award further contracts in 2016 before the Department of Defense makes a decision about full-rate production of the ships. The Navy will not be able to demonstrate that mission packages integrated with the C-frames can meet the minimum performance requirements until operational testing for both variants, the Freedom and the Independence, is completed, currently planned for 2019. I repeat, 2019. I again voice my concern that the Navy plans to purchase many, if not most, of the littoral combat ships in the program before knowing whether the ships will work as advertised and as needed. The GAO's report bottom line recommendations is to limit future C-frame and mission module purchases until the LCS program achieves key acquisition and testing milestones that would help make sure that the program delivers required combat capability. I agree completely with the GAO. GAO's concerns are shared by the Pentagon's independent chief tester and even the Navy itself in an internal report called the OPNAV report or PERES report. I highly recommend that anyone who has an interest in the littoral combat ship read these reports. In terms of the cost to national security and to the taxpayer, we simply cannot afford to continue committing our limited resources to an unproven program that may eventually account for more than a third of the surface combatant fleet. The LCS C-frame and mission modules are at different points along the acquisition life cycle. We need to put a pause on additional ship purchases and synchronize the plans for testing the C-frames and the mission modules to make sure that the Navy is executing a coherent acquisition strategy that will deliver combat capability responsive to what our operational commanders actually need. Also, the Navy has to lay out a clear top-level plan on how these ships will be used in response to reasonably foreseeable, relevant threats around the world. In other words, it needs to decide the concept of operation, or CONOPS, that this ship class will support. According to a declassified internal Navy report released last Tuesday, and I quote, "There are two options: building a CONOPS, that means concept of operations, to match the littoral combat ship's current capabilities, or modifying the ship to better meet the needs of the theater commanders," unquote. The report goes on to say, "The ship's current characteristics limit operations to a greater extent than envisioned by the concept of operations," unquote. The second option is to modify the ship to support the warfighting requirements. Our review identified opportunities to modify several of the ship's characteristics to more closely align with the intent of the original concept of operations, unquote. Right now, it seems like whatever combat capability LCS can muster is driving its mission, not the other way around, as in most ships. In other words, the littoral combat ship appears to be a ship looking for a mission. But just to perform its three currently intended primary missions, the Navy is looking at significant design changes and increasing littoral combat ship's crew size, even though it has already bought about 30% of all of the LCS ships it intends to buy. And that could increase its procurement and life cycle operation and support costs well beyond current estimates and strain its affordability. Given how many frigates, minesweepers, and patrol craft the Navy currently plans to retire over the next 5 years in favor of a littoral combat ship, this is particularly troubling. Notably, the Government Accountability Office also reports, quote, "Current LCS weapon systems are underperforming and offer little chance of survival in a combat scenario," unquote. In this regard, the Government Accountability Office appears to agree with the Pentagon's chief independent weapons tester. As this top Pentagon official has noted, before proceeding beyond early production, this program should complete initial operational testing and evaluation to determine that it is effective, suitable, and survivable. But LCS is not doing so. Why not? We need an answer to that. If for whatever reason the Navy believes it must deviate from that practice, what plan will it put in place to mitigate the resulting concurrency risk? Let me be clear. To justify the purchase of the remaining 32 ships in the program, the Navy must first provide credible evidence based on rigorous, operationally relevant, and realistic testing and evaluation that this ship will in fact be able to adequately perform its primary stated missions and meet combatant commander requirements. Congress must, at a minimum, thoroughly review this program before authorizing funding in fiscal year 2015 to buy the next 4 LCSs and require the Secretary of the Navy to certify, on the basis of sound written justification arising from sufficient initial operational testing and evaluation, that the LCS ships will be able to adequately perform their intended missions and provide our operational commanders with the combat capability they need. The American people are quite rightly tired of seeing their taxpayers wasted on disastrous defense programs such as the Air Force's failed ECSS program, or the Army's Future Combat System program, or the Navy's LH-71 Presidential Helicopter Replacement Program. The littoral combat ship must not be allowed to become yet another failed program in an already unacceptably long list of amorphous acronyms that, after squandering literally billions of taxpayers' dollars, have long since lost meaning. Mr. President, on the LCS program, the Navy must right its course today. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of...
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Zayat. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso.
Majority Leader.
Ask unanimous consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent the Senate recess until 2:15 to allow for our weekly caucus meetings, and the time during the recess be counted post-cloture with the time charged according to both sides.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
So the Senate is in recess now, so senators can attend their weekly party meetings. The Senate is scheduled to reconvene at 2:15 Eastern. Today, senators voted to move forward with one of the president's nominees to the National Labor Relations Board. We are expecting votes on several other nominations to the NLRB. Also this week, the Senate is working on a spending bill for transportation and housing programs. We spoke with a Capitol Hill reporter about the spending bills that are pending in Congress.